Aloha nui kako. Aloha, everybody. Good evening, and mahalo nui for taking the time out of your busy lives to tune into our webinar tonight. My name is Kavehi, and I will be your host this evening. Before we get started, I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement to honor Hawaii as an indigenous space, and also to recognize Kanaka Maoli, the traditional stewards of this land. Tonight's webinar is a part of Hawaii's Invasive Species Awareness Month, a month-long virtual event aimed at raising awareness about invasive species issues across the islands. The presentations that are happening this week focus on the Wao Kanaka, or the lands in which we live and work. Tomorrow at 6 p.m., there'll be a presentation on emerging pests in Hawaii. So please be sure to check out the deal on our website to register, and also to find more information on upcoming events throughout the month of February. Before I introduce our speaker, we have a quick poll for the audience. And while you folks are filling out that poll, I just wanted to go over some general housekeeping rules and introduce our tech team for tonight's event. Jade Miyashiro will be monitoring the Q&A on Zoom, so if you folks have any questions, please feel free to type them into the Q&A. We are also streaming this event live on our Facebook page, and so for those of you who are tuning in on Facebook, make sure to type any questions that you have in the chat, and Franny will make sure to get them to our speaker. This event is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel by the end of the week. All right. Is everybody done with the poll? Jade?
All right. Keep going. I'll let it run for a little bit longer.
All right. Okay, so I'm going to get started and introduce tonight's speaker. I have the privilege of introducing the amazing Molly Murphy. She is a plant Pono specialist at the Big Island Invasive Species Committee. She's lived in Hawaii for over 2 decades and holds a degree in environmental studies from the University of Hawaii at Hilo. Molly has worked in the forest, identifying species and assessing vegetation in her early career. And since starting her job at BISC in 2015, she's worked with nurseries and the community to prevent the spread of invasive plants and pests. Molly also creates content for plantpono.org, which is a website that helps residents make wise planting decisions for our yards and the Aina. And she is particularly interested in the history and movement of plants by humans. In reality, all Molly does is look at plants, talk about plants, write about plants, and think about plants. So without further ado, I will pass it on to Molly.
Oh, thank you, Kavehi, for that kind introduction. And mahalo to everybody for spending your evening with us. I think we will have some fun together. So tonight is an introductory botany class for beginners. I'll show you how to identify plants and verify their IDs. All right, let's go. What do you see when you look at this picture? Well, studies show that most people are just going to focus on the elephant and not all the plants that surround it. And that's because we are all plant blind. Plant blindness is a thing, but don't worry, we all have it. It is the human tendency to ignore plant species because plants barely move, they grow close together, and are often similar in color. So our brains just tend to lump them together. Where does it come from? Our bias against plants is hardwired. Early humans focused on animals as potential threats. So as we were evolving as humans, it was animals that were chasing us that was a threat. It wasn't the nice plants that just didn't really move that surrounded us. Well, why is it a problem? Plant blindness results in an alienated relationship with plants. And plants are the foundation of our ecosystems and food systems. Even if you haven't seen a plant in 3 days, you have to admit that plants make up your whole life, from the clothes you wear, to the beverages you drink, to the house you live in. Plants are the backbone to our society. But also, Hawaii is the invasive species capital of the world. And invasive species are the biggest threat to our stable ecosystems. So it's crucial to recognize invasive plants as threats. But today, you are taking a huge step away from plant blindness by tuning into this webinar. Also, green is the easiest for our eyes to see. And so even more, our brains just lump in all the shades of green. We tend not to notice all those shades, contributing even more to plant blindness. This is a patch in my garden, a small little patch. To most people, it probably looks nice and tidy, but to my eyes, I see weeds, undesirable plants creeping into my garden. Knowing the difference between leaves and their shapes is crucial, so I know what to pull out and what to leave. So I circled the undesirable plants here. This is Disaddus Rotindifolia. And I don't want it in my garden. What I do want is all these beautiful compound perennial peanut leaves. And I like that plant because it's a living mulch for my garden. It, keeps my soil intact, keeps the moisture level really more stable. And it really does a good job of keeping the weeds out, except for these ones. And finally, it, gives nitrogen to my garden. So I really like to tend to the perennial peanut. Have you ever heard the idiom, you can't see the forest for the trees? Which means we're too focused on small details and we don't get the whole picture. Well, plant blindness is kind of the opposite. It's like you can't see the trees for the forest, meaning we can see the forest, but we have a hard time recognizing the species within. So in tonight's webinar, we will cover some incorrect plant identifications, and then we'll go over basic plant identification, like growth forms, leaves, and flowers. Then we'll look at more incorrect plant identifications, and then I'll show you some easy identification techniques. And finally, I'll show you how to verify that plant identification. So plant misidentification happens to the best of us, but with social media, who do you know who to trust? Who is the expert? The loudest and most confident person does not indicate a correct plant ID. Okay, so I took this from Facebook a few weeks ago. The original poster, which I might use an acronym OP for original poster, and that just means a person that asked for a plant ID. So the OP wants to know what this plant is called. And there were a lot of answers / guesses to this question. So one person said ground cover. Well, what does that mean? She was asking for the plant ID. And when I look at this, I can see it's not a ground cover. It looks like an upright plant to me. So I'm just gonna say it's not a ground cover. So let's look at the next one, Elema. Elema Cytophalix. The description reads that it has 2 to 3 inch leaves that are oval to almost round with a pointed end and toothed or jagged edges. The upper surfaces of the leaves are bright green and the lower surfaces are usually densely hairy, giving a lighter color and a velvety appearance. Well, let's compare the two. So sure, both of the flowers are yellow and they both have kind of a similar shape. It seems like they both have 5 petals, but I know that they are completely different families. Elema is from the hibiscus family, and this plant is from the passion fruit family. Well, does this plant have velvety, soft hairs on the leaves? I think it's pretty obvious that it doesn't. And also, had the original poster looked at this plant a little more, they would have known that the flowers close up like mid-afternoon. In Ilima, the flowers are open all day. Okay, so it's not a ground cover, it's not Ilima. Let's look at Wadalia. Wadalia, this is a hard scientific name for me to pronounce. Sphagneticola tribolata. It is a creeping matted herb that grows up to 13 feet long with daisy-like yellow flowers. Let's compare the two. So again, yes, they both have yellow flowers, but I'm sure you can see obvious differences. This one is cup-shaped and the Wadalia is definitely daisy-like. So right there, we can tell they're different. Also, you can see that they have different growth forms or habits. This one is a creeping, matted, vining, herbaceous plant. And this one's growing more upright. But also, let's take a look at the leaves. Can you see how the Wadalia leaves are lobed? And when you think about the species name, tribolata of Wadalia, that means 3-lobed. So right there, that's telling us that this leaf is lobed. And when I look at this plant, they are not lobed at all. So it's not a ground cover, it's not Ilima, it must be yellow alder. So when I saw this post a few weeks ago, I was kind of freaking out because the original poster had turned off commenting. And I thought all these common names were incorrect. All I could do was like what my friend Ray Sundstrom right here had posted. And he said the scientific name, Ternaria Umafolia. And I was like, yay, Ray. He's a master gardener over in Kona on Hawaii Island. Very trusted source. So I see all these yellow alders and I'm like, this is not the right name because I know this plant is Falstamiana. But luckily I saw the scientific name. But that's a thing with common names is they could be, they're varied depending on your culture or location, etc. So it's always good at least for one person to post the scientific name. And I know it can be daunting and hard to pronounce scientific names. Like certainly I have issues trying to pronounce some of them as well. But we've got to start somewhere with plants, and learning the common name first is an excellent first step. So yes, it's yellow alder, Tunaria Umafolia, and the description reads, deeply veined leaves with lanceolate, that are lanceolate and toothed margin, serrated margin. Yellow star-shaped flowers are composed of 5 unequal oval-shaped petals with rounded tips, and the flowers close in the afternoon. So there are more than 400,000 flowering plants on the planet, and no one can know them all. In fact, our brains max out at about 2,000 names. I'm not sure if I have that many names in my head. I hope I do. But even if I did, some names will be lost and you're going to forget names no matter how good you are at botany. So it's good to know the botanical descriptions because it helps you relearn the plants and also it really helps you see the plant. Growth form is a good place to start when describing a plant. It's a good first starting plant. So first you want to see, is it herbaceous, which means it pretty much has a green flexible stem, or is it woody, which means it has a rigid stem that's usually brown. I won't really be going over grasses, sedges, and rushes, just as a disclaimer, because they are very difficult and tricky. So we're just gonna go with, you know, large trees, shrubs, herbaceous plants, and vines and climbers. So a large tree is characterized by, it's got kind of a larger woody brown trunk that goes up a ways from the ground and then starts branching, you know, at least a few feet from the ground. A shrub or small tree starts branching much closer to the ground, has more branches, and it's usually more rounded in shape. Now, I know it can be, you know, difficult between large tree and shrub and small tree. And it depends on the age of the plant that you're talking about to some extent, and also how it's cultivated. I've seen bougainvilleas where people trim the bottoms and make a nice smooth trunk on top. So it kind of looks like a nice small tree. Or it could be herbaceous, which means green stem that's flexible, or perhaps a vine or climber, which means it's a creeping herbaceous plant, you know, green stem that's flexible, and it climbs over other vegetation and man-made objects to use as support. So it could use fences, homes, you know, whatever. But the thing about habit is plants can make up more than one depending on the age and habitat where it's growing. So here's a picture of devil's weed, which is a noxious weed that was recently discovered on Hawaii Island. So here on the right, we found devil's weed. I mean, it was found before us, but we found it growing near the ocean, and it has an herbaceous stem, and it's only about 2 feet tall. So if I had just seen this patch, I would call it herbaceous. But then up the road a bit in Kalapana, we found the same species of devilweed, and it is climbing up this utility pole into the ohia and climbing along the power poles. It is a woody, scrambling plant. The diameter of the stems could be 2 inches on some of the larger ones. And it's woody, it's not so flexible. But so we think the one in Kalapana is at least 10 years old, and this one right here towards the ocean is a much younger population. So plants don't always follow their own rules. They can misbehave and take different habits throughout their life. But you just should think about the location, the elevation, how much sun or shade it's getting. Is it getting roadside cut? Because that makes a big difference. So different environments could mean different habits or growth forms. So leaf branching is the next thing you want to look at. These are the 2 main types of leaf branching. An alternate is the most common kind of leaf branching. And it's just like it sounds. The leaves are coming off alternately along the stem. And we can see the axillary buds right here. So this katuk is alternate branching. Or it could be opposite, like basil. And that's when the leaves and nodes come out completely opposite each other on the stem. Or it could be whorled, like Jamaican verving. It's kind of a common weed here on Hawaii Island. I don't know where you're tuning in from, but and whorled means it has at least 3 leaves coming off opposite on the stem. So they're like at least 3 leaves opposite from the same point on the stem. Or this is much, much less common. It could be basil or rosette style leafing, which means it's like a rosette style of leaves coming off the ground without a stem. So mullein is a good example of basil or rosette leaf branching. You also want to look at the leaf structure. Are you looking at a true leaf? Is it a simple leaf? So true leaves and simple leaves are the same thing. So a true leaf / simple leaf each leaf will have a petiole, a node, and perhaps an axillary bud. So we can see on this autograph tree, we can obviously see the petioles and the nodes coming off of this autograph tree. And here, on this banana magnolia, we can see alternate branching, but we can see obvious axillary buds coming off of this banana magnolia. So that means it's a simple leaf compared to a compound leaf. So a compound leaf, this whole thing is a leaf. Each one of these is called a leaflet. And each leaf has one axillary bud or node or petiole. And when the leaves get old and they begin to die and fall off the tree, you're going to see this whole structure fall. You're not going to just see one leaflet fall. And compound leaves can be alternate or opposite branching depending on the species. So Octopus Tree is called palmately compound leaves. African tulip has pinnately compound leaves. And Albizia has twice pinnately compound leaves. And you can see the more pinnate the leaf gets, the more feathery in appearance it gets. It's also a good idea to look at the leaf shape. So Malokia has a heart-shaped leaf. It's cordate. I don't really have a good way to help you remember cordate. I've seen some people say cardiac, sounds like cordate. I don't know, but just knowing heart-shaped is good enough when describing heart-shaped leaves. Or it could be lanceolate. So lanceolate is kind of like a lance from jousting in medieval times. Song of India has lanceolate leaves. It could be ovate, like egg-shaped, like autograph tree. You know, it's kind of shaped like an egg. Or perhaps it's orbicular. Orbicular means orb or circle, like nasturtiums. Or deltoid. So delta means triangle, like devilweed. You can see how it's kind of deltoid shaped. Or perhaps it's palmate, which is kind of like hand-shaped, and papayas have a palmate leaf shape. So there are so many different leaf types, and these are just some common ones. Leaf lobes are indentations in the leaf. It's like an undivided blade. So it's good to look at how many indentations it has, how deep are they, and what is the shape of the lobes. But again, plants misbehave and break their own rules. Right down here, we have Baile or Tongan spinach. This is all the same species. And you can see how different the lobing is just on this, you know, the same species. And I've seen ulu do the same thing, completely different lobes on the leaves compared to like other plants that I've known. But one thing that's good to know is once it's lobed, it's always lobed. So you'll never see an ulu with unlobed leaves. And you also want to look at the leaf margins. So there's two kinds. It's entire, which means completely smooth, clean edge, like this autograph tree. Or it could be serrated, which is like a serrated knife, like something you would use to cut bread or steak. You know, it's jagged. So devil's weed has a jagged edge. And there are lots of different kinds of serration, but it's just good for now to know, is it serrated or not? You also want to look at leaf color. So crotons are very obviously, you can see the color, it's very flashy, they're variegated or molted, like that's an obvious color. But you might want to look at the new growth. So devilweed, one of the defining characteristics of it is the new growth comes out purple. So it's good to note the new growth. And also check the underside of the leaves, like this coleus we recently found. You know, the top leaves were green and the bottom was purple. If we hadn't flipped over a leaf, we wouldn't have known. And also, does it have hair, otherwise known as pubescence? So Clidemia has pubescence, which means it has hair on the stems and on the leaves. or it could be glabrous, which means smooth. So Octopus Tree has, from what I've seen, absolutely no hair on it. It's completely smooth. Or, you know, plants, they're always inhabiting different types of, plant characteristics. It could be both. So Ohia could be both glabrous or pubescent. So if you look at Ohia growing closer to the ocean, it's very, very likely that it's glabrous, completely smooth and no hair. But the higher you go up in elevation, the more likely it is for it to have this soft, fine hair on the leaves. And that pubescence it helps protect the leaves from the ultraviolet rays. And it also helps it capture water from, passing clouds and fog drip and fog. And the pubescence could be there's a lot of different ways to describe it. It could be coarse or long or sparse or different colors, depending on the plant. Also, leaf phenation is a good thing to look at. So here are 4 common leaf phenation patterns. It could be reticulate, which is just basically webbing. So kava'u, which is our native holly, has reticulate webbing. And if you pick a leaf and hold it up to the sunlight, it kind of looks like, I don't know, stained glass or alligator skin. It's just webbing. Or like autograph tree. I don't really see much prominent veination except for the midrib. So I would just say this one has a prominent midrib. Or pinnate, like this Hypsis species. And that means it's got one main vein coming from the stem down to the tip of the leaf, and then it has secondary veins coming off the main vein. Or perhaps it's palmate, like this chaya. So all the veins start in a central location, and then they go down longitudinally to the leaf tips. So I really wanted to focus mostly on the green parts of plants because flowers and fruit, they're very flashy and easy for our eyes to see, but they're also easy to identify, or much easier than if you're just seeing the green parts of the plants. But you can't always depend on flowers and fruits to be present. Like even with the Ternaria Umafolia that we looked at earlier, like that plant, the flowers aren't even open all day. So we really can't depend on flowers and fruits to be present. But I thought I'd just take a quick minute to talk about different types of flowers. So when you're noticing flowers, you should look at the color, the bloom time, think about how many petals it has. Does it even have petals? Well, here are some basic types of flowers. So single flower, like a rose, or wheat, which has a spike. The Vanda orchid has a raceme. Yerba mate has a corium. Anthurium has a spadix. Dill has an umbel. Tree heliotrope has a cyme. Rice flowers are panicles. And sunflower flowers are composites. But you could also just look at the flower types and kind of just put your own words to it. Like maybe it looks like a funnel or a trumpet or a rosette or a pom-pom, like devil's weed that we found here on Hawaii Island. And that's just a bunch of showy stamens, or not showy, but kind of messy hair stamens. No petals, just stamens. Or maybe it looks like a cross or a star or a saucer or a cup, or maybe it's tubular or like a bell-shaped. So just use your own words to describe the flower when you're looking to identify it. But be careful, you might not actually be looking at flowers. It could be showy bracts. So all of these colorful things that you're looking at here, none of these are actually the flowers. They're not the petals. The flower, like on this bougainvillea, is this really, really small white flower in the middle of the pink bracts. So showy bracts are kind of a modified leaf. And poinsettias, the flowers, you can't even see them, they're so tiny. Also, when you're looking to identify a plant, look at unique characteristics. What makes this plant pop? Does it have sap? And if so, what's the color? Just be careful with sap because some of it can be irritating to your skin. Does it have a scent? Maybe you should crush a leaf. Are the leaves waxy or bendable? Does it have thorns? What are the bark color? Just whatever is interesting to you about the plant, just take note of it. And finally, you want to think about the location of the plant you're trying to identify. Is it on the leeward or windward side? What elevation is it at? Was it recently disturbed? Is it a roadside plant? Is it a plant that's often cut by roadside machinery? Maybe it's growing close to the ocean. Did it pop out of a pot or out of your garden out of nowhere? Or maybe it's a lawn weed or it's coming up in rocks or cinder or mulch. So you want to really think about location when you're thinking about plant identification. Okay, so let's botanize. We've learned some key terms, and let's put those to plants that I think most of us should know. Clidemia, Clidemia Herta. It's a shrub and it has a simple leaf, so it's not compound. It has pink, stiff hairs. And if you ever hold up a Clidemia leaf into the sun, you'll see those hairs are pink and stiff. It has 3 main longitudinal veins. The leaves are arranged opposite, and it's widespread in many environments. Even in the deepest, darkest, most beautiful native forests that I've worked in, I would sometimes see Clidemia. And even in my backyard here in Lower Puna, I see Clidemia popping up. So definitely it's widespread in many different environments. Sensitive grass, Mimosa Pundika. It is a low-growing shrub. The leaves are compound. They're bipinnately arranged. The leaves fold when touched. So that's something that would make the plant pop. You know, that's something that's pretty rare to see in plants. I would say it has pom-pom style purple flowers, and it's disturbance adapted, and it's a lawn weed. Octopus tree, Chefrilera Actinophila. It is a large tree with palmately compound leaves that are alternately arranged. The leaves are shiny. It has entire margins, so they're not serrated, each leaflet, just smooth edges. And it grows in roadsides, vacant lots, and disturbed areas. Trumpet tree, Cycopria Obtusifolia. It's also a large tree, and it has palmately lobed leaves that are alternately arranged. The leaves are dull green on top and white gray underneath. It also has entire margins, and also it grows in roadsides, vacant lots, and disturbed areas. So I've tried to stay away from scientific names too much because they are daunting and hard to pronounce if you don't really know them well. But I see a lot of people confusing these 2 species, and at least knowing the genus name goes a long way to understanding which species is which, especially because they inhabit the same environments. So I like to tell people Chefrilera is shiny, like these leaves are so much more shiny, and Cycopria is not. So that's a good way to quickly identify the difference, because I'm sure you can notice the different shades of green between these 2 plants. But there are some differences. The Chefrilera or octopus tree is palmately compound. The Cycopria or trumpet tree is palmately lobed. So that's a big difference. But the shade of green, I think, is an easy way to tell the difference, especially if they're not fruiting or flowering. So I found this meme today. I thought it was funny. When you study plant taxonomy and you can't stop naming things in botanical nomenclature. So here we have a utility pole and somebody named it Polus utilitatis. So scientific names, they can be hard to pronounce, but they give us insight into the plant description. It's just that the language could be in Greek or Latin. And if the names aren't describing the plant, usually it's paying homage to some botanist or naturalist from a long time ago. And if it's not doing that, it might be indicating where the plant is native to, like mango, Magnifera indica. So the indica means India. So it is good to kind of start creeping into those scientific names. Okay, so let's look at more fun plant misidentification. And like I said, it does happen to the best of us, but it is rampant on social media. And people will double down if they're wrong, even when the correct characteristics, identification characteristics are pointed out. So here are some blatant misidentifications that I took from Facebook. Okay, are these the same plant? I mean, obviously, if you're looking at them together, you can tell they're not the same plant. The one on the right is autograph tree, and the one on the left is wood rose. So the original poster posted a picture of an autograph tree fruit and wanted to know what it was. But a commenter kept insisting it was wood rose. And I don't know why they kept insisting. I mean, I guess I can see they're both brown, but where's the red seeds and the shape is different. So wood rose, Marima tuberosa, it's a climbing vine. That's all we need to know. But also you can see it has lobed leaves. Autograph tree, Clusia rosea, it's a tree up to 65 feet. I mean, really, that's all you need to know. So these two species, they stay in their same habits or growth forms. Autograph tree is never going to be a climbing vine, and wood rose will never be a tree. So those are like, you know, two plants that at least obey their growth form. All right, let's do some more. What is it? Is it Lilikoi? Let's look. So Lilikoi, Passiflora edulis, it has 3-lobed green leaves that are finely toothed, that are deep green and glossy above, but dull green below. Well, obviously you can see the difference. The one on the right, the Passiflora edulis, the Lilikoi, it's got lobed leaves. The one on the left does not have lobed leaves. The one on left, has more circular leaves. And look at where the stem's attached. It's attaching more in the center of the leaf. And with the Lilikoi, it's kind of at the end of the leaf. So right there, without any fruits or flowers, we can say it's not Lilikoi. Okay, but I do have to say this. When I was putting this presentation together and I made this slide, I did actually see a Lilikoi leaf. I don't know if you can see it. There is a tiny, tiny leaf below the, I don't think you can see my pointer. There is a tiny Lilikoi leaf in this picture. So I don't know if the commenter was trying to be a smart aleck, or perhaps they were just trying to identify everything in the picture. But the original poster wanted to know what this big leafed plant was. Okay, so another answer was Malokia. Malokia umbrellata, sometimes known as toilet paper tree here in Puna. It has heart-shaped leaves that are toothed along the edges and covered with soft hair. Well, obviously, when we compare the two, you see that they are different. The serration looks different. The one on the left looks more wavy to me, and the Malokia on the right definitely looks more jagged and obvious serration. Also, the one on the left doesn't have that indentation for the chordate or heart-shaped leaf, and you can see the stem doesn't attach in the same place. So even with just the leaves and without fruit or flowers, we can say it is not Malokia. All right, let's look at Bang-a-Bang. Macadanga mappa, sometimes known as poor man's umbrella. So it is bing-a-bing, which has round leaves and the stem is attached to the middle of the leaf rather than the edge. So that one was easy. Okay, what is it? Is it toxic red berry? So again, the OP wanted to know what the name of this plant was. If I look up toxic red berry on a search engine, will this species come up? It's not going to. I will admit I did try it. It does not come up. So we want to be like specific when we are, identifying people's plant requests. So is it long gone? Dymocarpus long gone. Okay, it has glossy, entire, leathery, wavy edged, pinnate compound leaves, which each leaf having 6 to 10 narrow leaflets in opposite pairs. So that's the key right here, 6 to 10 leaflets. That's an even number of leaflets. And you can see the one on the left has an odd number of leaflets. So right there, we know it's the same, it's not the same species. Also, you can see the one on the left is serrated, the one on the right is not. But it's a good guess, I have to say, because they both have, the pinnate compound leaves. All right, so it's not toxic red berry, or maybe it is, but like I said, that's not a name. It's not long gone. Is it African tulip? African tulip, Spathodea campanulata. It's a large compound leaf with 5 to 19 deeply veined oval leaflets. Margin is entire. So we know right now that they both have an odd number of leaflets. And so both compound leaves have an odd number of leaflets. So this is where it gets pretty difficult without fruits or flowers. But I can see the one on the left has a serrated leaflet and the one on the right does not. Also, this one has kind of a red stem. So what would have been good for the original poster when asking for a plant ID is if they said location. Had they said Ka'u, I'm sure most people would have correctly identified this plant and they wouldn't have gotten so many junk answers. So yes, it is Christmas berry, Shinus terebinthifolius. It has odd pinnate leaves with sometimes red stem, toothed leaflets, and a strong smell of turpentine when crushed. So had the original poster like crushed the leaves also, like gone that extra step and smelled it, that would have gone a long way to identifying the plant and getting less junk answers. All right, let's do another one. What is it? Is it rubbish? So again, if I Google rubbish, will this plant come up? Well, I'll tell you it doesn't, because yes, I did try. It's really important to know what you're controlling. Like, what if this plant has a really deep taproot and if I pull it out, I'm gonna break my back? Or what if I just cut it and that doesn't kill it and all of a sudden it grows up, it coppices many, many, many more branches. You wanna know what you have if you're gonna control it. So rubbish is not a good answer. Let's look at gunpowder. Gunpowder, Trema orientalis, green leaves, alternately arranged, ovate, hairy, and have toothed margins. Well, right away, I can see that these leaves are arranged opposite each other. I can see the leaf shape are different. The one on the left is more lanceolate, and the one on the right is more cordate, more heart-shaped. So right away, I can tell it's not the same plant. Okay, let's look at milkweed. Milkweed, what does that mean? That is not specific at all. I looked it up and there are at least 23 common names for milkweed that are all different species. That doesn't help anybody with the identification. So it's really good to be more specific. All right, so it's dogtail, Baile asiatica. The leaves are narrowly lanceolate to ovate, oppositely arranged to branches round in section. Okay, let's play this game again. What is it? Well, first of all, a non-blurry picture would have helped, but that's not what we got. So we'll work with this. So one person said not a weed. What does that even mean? Not a weed. A weed is something growing unwanted in an area. So if this grows in my garden, which sometimes it does, it's a weed to me. I'm gonna pull it out. I don't care what you say. There was an old book from the 1950s called Weeds of Hawaii's Pastures. And they listed Pukiave, A'ali'i, and Puakala, 3 lovely native plants as weeds. And that's because it was useless to the cattle ranchers because the cattle didn't eat it. It provided no forage for them. So it was a weed to the cattle ranchers. But obviously those native plants are very, very useful to us and all of our society. And I think people get that confused sometimes with invasive species, which means a plant not native to the area under consideration and whose introduction is likely to cause harm to the economy, the environment, our health, or way of life. So nowhere in that definition does it say the plant is useless to everybody. In fact, 90% of invasive species in Hawaii were imported by humans because a human thought it was useful or beautiful in some way. So yeah, not a weed is not an answer. Let's go to Wadalia. Wadalia, it's a creeping matted herb, as you know, that grows up to 13 feet long with daisy-like yellow flowers. Well, you know, the flowers are the same color, so I'll give them that, but I'm sure you can see they are completely different. The one on the left looks more like an Asteraceae type of flower. Well, I guess they are the same family. So the one on the left looks more dandelion style, and the one on the right is more daisy-like. But I'm sure you can see they have completely different habits or growth forms. The one on the left is it's like a small herb growing. And the one on the right, the Wadalia, is a creeping matted herb that takes over everything. But again, look at the leaf lobing. The Wadalia, like we talked about earlier, has 3 lobes on each leaf. And this one on the left, very, very different leaf lobing. And the leaf branching is different. Like this one comes out as a rosette or basil. The one on the left comes out as a rosette or basil style branching. All right, so it's not Wadalia. Let's look at dandelion. Dandelion, Taracaxum officinale. It's an herbaceous plant that consists of a rosette of basil leaves and occasional flowering stalks. Smooth leaves have pointed lobes. So this one is a little bit tricky. I can say right off the bat, because this was a local social media group where people were asking what the plant on the left was. I knew it wasn't dandelion because they're not that common here. I don't often see them growing wild. And I've surveyed a lot of Hawaii, both cultivated and uncultivated places. But see how the stems on the dandelion, they're more robust. The flowers are bigger. The dandelion doesn't have, the flowers are much, much bigger. And then look at the leaf lobing between the two. The dandelion definitely has pointed lobes, and the one on the left, it's more rounded. So spoiler alert, it's not dandelion, it's hairy cat's ear, which is a very, very funny common name. Hypocaryus radiotica. Flower heads will often appear on a branched stem. So we can see the branched stem on the upper part of the picture. The stem is wiry and thin compared to dandelion. So I can see that. And the leaves have rounded lobes. Okay, so I worked in the forest of Hawaii for over a decade, identifying plants and assessing vegetation. And I was pretty good at my job, but I only had, I don't know, 200 or less species that I had to learn how to identify. So when I came out of the bushes to start working for the Big Island Invasive Species Committee, it was a whole new world of plant identification for me. I had to learn cultivated plants and naturalized plants that grow in the sunlight. Like, there was a lot to learn. And there are more than 15,000 flowering plants here in Hawaii. And again, no one can know them all. Also, so you could use a dichotomous key, which is a great way to identify plants, but those aren't accessible to everybody. Sometimes they're hard to get, and they don't always exist on the internet. So I'll show you some easy tricks that I learned along the way using the keywords that we just learned. And this is a great way to start out with searching for plant IDs on the internet. So now that you know some ways of looking at plants and their characteristics, you can just plug in those things that make it pop into a search engine like Google and then look at the pictures. So I put in pink, flowers, thorns, Hawaii, and I was looking for sleepy grass. So I just put in those few keywords and it came up. Look at that, I got 2 hits. And I learned that it was Mimosa Pundika. So then I want to verify and make sure Mimosa Pundika is the correct ID. So first I put it into Star Environmental Plants of Hawaii, which is a very reliable website with so many pictures so that you can verify your plant ID, especially now that you know how to look at plants. So I put it into the STARS website and look at all these pictures and I'm like, yep, that's it, Mimosa Pundika. But also I'm gonna go a step further and I'm gonna put it into plantpono.org. And that's another great source for identifying plants, especially invasive ones. If you would have scrolled down a little farther, it shows different invasive characteristics, identification characteristics. But I can also see, like right here real quick on the right, that the seeds remain viable yet dormant for many, many years. I can learn why it's a bad plant. And again, if I scroll down even farther, I can learn other plants that I could use as an alternative to this invasive one. All right, let's do another one. This is a plant that people often ask me the ID of. So I put in root, beer, smelling, roots, Hawaii, white flower. I don't know if I said this before, but if not, I'll just say it again. It's very, very important to put Hawaii into your search terms if you're looking for plants this way. There are a lot of people that have done plant write-ups in Hawaii and uploaded them to different websites or search engines. So it really helps Google or whatever you're using to find the species that you're looking for. So I put in these keywords and I got a hit, and I can see it's David Bruce Leonard's site. And I trust him. I know he knows his plants. So I click on his website and I see, heck yeah, he put down the scientific name, Polygala paniculata. And it says root beer scent on the roots. So I just want to make sure, even though I trust that website, I go to Star Environmental and I put it in and I can look at all these pictures and I'm like, yep, that's the right plant. I feel confident that I just found Polygala paniculata. Okay, I think this, oh no, okay. So here's another one, basil leaves fuzzy Hawaii. So I put this in and I got so many hits. I only circled 3, but there's at least 2 or 3 more. So I learned what the scientific name was. For Bassicum faspius, I was looking for common mullein. So I put it into plantpono.org and I learned when it was introduced. I find out that the seeds can remain dormant yet viable for 100 years and that it's an invasive plant. I put it into Kim and Plants of Hawaii, Kim and Forest Stars website, and I can see pictures of Mauna Kea along with the pictures of the mullein. So that helps me further verify the plant ID that I was looking for. Okay, last one, I think. I put in cordate leaves, spike, flower, Hawaii. And I was looking for a certain plant and it did come up. It came up at least once, but maybe twice. All right, I was looking for false kava, Piper auratum. Well, this is a really good trusted website, the Hawaii Invasive Species Council. I see that they're talking about it. I can see that it is a KISC target species. So that means the Hawaii Invasive Species Committee is working to eradicate it off Kauai, which means it's not that widespread there and they have a chance of success. Here on Hawaii Island, there is no, it's just too widespread for eradication at this point. But I just wanted to go a step further, even though I trust the Hawaii Invasive Species Council. Excuse me, I put it into Star Environmental and I see more pictures to further verify. I put it into Plant Pono. I see it's high risk and I see invasive characteristics like it is shade tolerant. And I learned that it grows twice as fast as kava. That's pretty scary. All right, so what about plant ID apps? Well, you don't really want to rely on them. It's a good tool, but it is lazy man's botany. Plus, relying on them isn't building the botany skills in your brain. You got to work for that knowledge, which, you know, you got to work for everything that's good in life. But these are 2 plant apps that I like. I like iNaturalist and plant.net. But if anybody here has ever used one of these plant apps, I'm sure you know that it's very, very, very difficult to get the correct ID for Hawaii. So that further means you need to verify it with trusted sources with whatever answer they give you. So a few weeks ago, I was at Pohiki Beach down in Lower Puna in Pahoa, and I saw this plant, the plant on the left. And I knew what it was, but I couldn't remember. I saw the opposite leaves and the prominent midrib. It was growing near the ocean, but I just, you know, I couldn't remember the name. So I put it into iNaturalist to see what they would say. Lazy man's botany, I'm guilty of it too. And iNaturalist says, we're not confident enough to make a recommendation, but here are our top suggestions. And they tell me fried eggplant, Chinese photinia, tea, and palmetto. Okay, so like I said, this is growing near the ocean. And I already know that those 4 species that they listed don't normally grow by the ocean. Plus, this plant, I might not have mentioned it, the one on the left, was cultivated. Somebody was obviously growing it and, you know, cultivating it near the ocean. So I scroll down a little more and I see Alexandrian laurel. And I'm like, what is that name? But thank goodness I looked at the Latin name, Calophyllum inophyllum. And I was like, that's it, it's Kamani. So I put it into Plants of Hawaii, Calophyllum inophyllum, Kamani, and I see it. And gosh, it makes me so happy to see such a useful Polynesian introduction being grown near the ocean, like right after the old lava flow. Okay, so besides, you know, using your skills and the internet and dichotomous keys, Here are a few resources that I like to use. Weeds of Hawaii's Pastures and Natural Areas is an excellent book. I own it and I use it all the time. The Tropical Plant Families Information Handbook is a really great book when you really want to dive into botany and learn plant families. I wanted to get into plant families tonight, but there just wasn't enough time. And a Tropical Garden Flora, which is basically my Bible. I use this book every day, and it basically describes a lot of cultivated plants and where they came from and who brought them here. So I know I've complained about social media groups and, it's hard to trust strangers and who do you trust? People get the answer wrong. But I do have to say this Facebook group, Plant Identification, is an excellent resource for getting a plant ID. That is the name of it, Plant Identification, that's it. And it has very, very strict rules. You upload a picture of your plant, you say your elevation, maybe if it's cultivated or growing wild, that's it. Don't say anything else. Don't ask if it's invasive or edible or medicinal. This group has nothing to do with any uses or background information on the plant. It is only about plant ID. And then when somebody gives you the correct ID, you're not supposed to put an other correct ID and comment again after it's been given. All you can do is like the first correct ID, because they don't want 20 people giving the same ID over and over. What's the point of that? So if you want good, clean plant identifications, I say Plant Identification on Facebook. And of course, your local invasive species committee is a wonderful, wonderful resource for plant identification. You can contact us at the Big Island Invasive Species Committee. Oahu, it would be the Oahu Invasive Species Committee or the Maui Invasive Species Committee, the Molokai Invasive Species Committee, or the Kauai Invasive Species Committee. We are all here to help you. And, maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but one of the favorite parts of our jobs is identifying plants and helping people, learn plant ID. And who knows, if you went through all these steps and you still can't identify the plant, maybe you found something crazy that should be reported. I don't know. It's worth trying and contacting us. So I hope now everybody can really see the plants. You don't have to be a botanist to learn plant identification. Just use your eyes and really look at the plant. And if you're not sure, now you know a few terms. Just plug them into a search engine and find the pictures, and then verify if you aren't sure. And of course, if you ask strangers on a local Facebook group, now you know how to verify other people's plant IDs for yourself. And again, if you can't find the ID, please, please, please contact us. So, well, thank you for your time and congratulations for taking a huge step away from plant blindness. I would like to thank the Hawaii Invasive Species Council for funding our project and the whole BISC crew, the Big Island Invasive Species crew, especially my team, Springer, Jade, Franny, and